Alright, YouTube. I'd like to weigh in with my thoughts on Tucker Carlson having Bill Nye in that interview. I thought it was really interesting. I think Bill Nye was squirming a little bit, and he didn't appreciate the question appropriately. And his answers, in my opinion, were smoke and mirrors. Because here's the deal about these climate scientists. Their funding depends on someone else giving them money, and that someone else is going to only give them money if they see a potential to make a profit. So essentially, what these climate scientists are driving is things like a carbon tax or fancy green, environmentally friendly hand soaps and house cleaners and that kind of stuff. And so it's really agenda driven, and it isn't necessarily so much environmentally driven. Now, it is a fact that human beings are having a negative impact on the planet, but the weather is not the appropriate barometer of that impact. If you look at the historical record, there are maybe a dozen occasions where there were mass extinction events going many millions of years back into the past. And with the exception of a couple of them that were precipitated by objects coming in from outer space, the majority of extinction events that have happened here on planet Earth that have caused catastrophic weather changes that resulted in the die-off of millions of different species, the majority of those events were caused by two things. One is the intensity of solar output, and the other is something known as oceanic anoxic events. And this is when the level of oxygen in the ocean changes through chemical reactions, primarily based on the composition of the atmosphere and the composition of the ocean water, which is driven, both of those factors are driven by the vegetative biodiversity that's present on the planet at the time. Through the runoff that comes from the rivers into the ocean, delivering varying quantities and proportions of nutrients based on the vegetative biodiversity in the soil makeup, and the biodiversity of plants dictates more or less the composition of the atmosphere, which also reacts with the ocean water. And so these are the things that have caused climate change, historically speaking, on this planet. And the idea that human beings are affecting the weather is nonsense. It's a nonsense barometer. It's possible that our activities do have an impact on the weather. In fact, it's probably likely, but it's not the driving factor behind the change in the weather. And the change in the weather isn't the thing that we should be focusing on. The elephant in the room is something that no one wants to talk about, especially these climate scientists who rely on fancy machines and laboratories, and especially not politicians who love to have their fine cigars and fine wine and sports cars and big mansions. The elephant in the room comes down to two root causes, two things that man is doing that's destroying the planet. The first one is agriculture, specifically large-scale agriculture. Large-scale agriculture supports large population centers, and that's the second thing, city building. Those two things are destroying this planet, agriculture and city building. But nobody wants to talk about that, because that would mean admitting that pretty much everything that people hold dear in their lives is a problem. And so that's the elephant in the room that people can't discuss. That's the problem with environmental degradation. And so if people really want to be environmentalists and they really want to make a difference, then they need to demand that we dismantle our cities and that we stop large-scale agriculture. And that will precipitate in the decline. There will be no more heavy industry, and there will be no more industrial pollutants, and there will be no more resource degradation, because we won't be needing all of those different natural resources to build cities and tanks and airplanes and iPhones and computers and all of the other nonsense that we hold so dear to our modern lives. And there is no solution to this problem. I'm not pretending to say, oh, well, we're going to solve it by destroying cities or, burning down farms or something. It's a problem that doesn't have a solution. Man has already crossed the event horizon in that sense, I think. That's my guess. There are other people like Terence McKenna, who was a brilliant mind, who had some other thoughts that maybe human beings could progress away from large population centers and destructive agriculture into a more authentic lifestyle in terms of living the way that other creatures on this planet live, in homeostasis with the planet. So that's my thoughts on climate change and Bill Nye, the wormy climate scientist who doesn't want to talk about what the real problem is. Thanks for listening.